All right, I think we're live now. So, hello everyone, happy Thursday, and welcome to our No Code Ops live community show. I think this is like episode 5 from our series of APIs. And so, we're very happy to be here again to continue this very hot topic within our community about APIs. And today we're here with Guy Batts. Hi, Guy. You've been at No Code Ops before. You were a speaker here in the past, and we absolutely love your passion for, not only just everything to do with no code, but most specifically to Airtable and Make in particular. And so when we were talking about APIs, you're very, just jumped onto the wagon and you were like, hey, if I can help, I'll be more than happy to. And, you were just the person I was waiting for because I love your expertise and just like all the dedication that you put into everything to do with no code and just helping others. And so we've been during this series of APIs, like we've noticed like how they've been working as a little bit of a bridge in between no coders and kind of traditional development. And so that's why we're exploring the world of APIs and also offering it to our operators, because I think it's going to upskill them so much. And you can tell us more about that. And today in particular, as we were saying, we're going to explore a little bit more of the APIs that have to do with Airtable, which is one of the tools that our operators use the most, and Make, which is another favorite within our communities. So enough of me blabbing. I'm just gonna hand it over to you. Can you give us a little bit of an introduction on yourself? I know you're a low-code solutions developer, but maybe you can tell us a bit more and something that we will be diving in today as well.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, everyone. Great to be here again. Thanks for the intro, Claudia. My name is Guy Butts. I do own and run a agency up here, as you can see, and then my nice little logo here. But we're low and no code developers, so we enjoy development. Do a lot with Airtable, a lot with mostly everything with Make is our main bread and butter for our solutions. But really anything in and around low and no code. So we've got some client work in Retool. The previous 9 to 5 position I had, we did a lot in Retool and a lot in Supabase, so relational databases, Postgres, some of the more backend development as well. But really no code solution engineering and development, taking something from idea or ideation to an actual product or a deliverable. So today, wanted to cover and try to explore a little bit with the new Airtable Web API. It's not really like a 2.0 API. It's more of like a V0 of the new API. Like they had an API before and you could do things with it, but this one is expanding on that. It's still a V0, but there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more, we would call it the meta API. Like you can do record manipulation like you used to be able to do with creating and manipulating records, selecting and getting records, but now you can expand on that and actually start manipulating Airtable's architecture. So creating of tables, listing of tables, creating fields, listing comments. So there's a whole lot of other functionality that we're new to in the Airtable world. I mean, there's probably higher end clients and users of Airtable that have seen this on the enterprise side for a while, but a lot of us at this level this is new to us. So wanted to put this session together to help explore the new API, but we also, when they're releasing this, they also have 2 new authentication methods to get into the API for your account. So right now, starting 8 days ago, Feb 1, we're now in the API key deprecation window. So there's this window between February 1 and February 1 of next year to get all of your front end stuff, all of your integrations, all of your everything that uses a standard API key switched from an API key to either a personal access token or an OAuth integration. So going to be going over 2 things kind of in one on this call. Going to be going over that a little bit first, because that's how we get into the API. And then going to be going over how to use some of the endpoints of the new API. So we can look at, getting records, listing records, but also, hey, I want to create a table automatically. Hey, I want to view my tables and bases somehow. And I tried to come up with a couple of use cases for this workshop, but I didn't really get very far because I can't really think of, both in my business and some of the businesses I have, where I would operationalize these endpoints. But this intro should hopefully show you what you can do, answer a bunch of questions, and at least try to explore with you, Claudia, or explore live what you could do with this API in your business, in your use of Airtable, be it in your personal life as well. So I'm going to dive into the new API and what the various endpoints are, what you can do with them. And I'm sure people are going to have a lot of questions and want to explore.
Yeah,
but
exactly. And, that's something
happy to,
that we can do. We'll just build it together like we like to do in the no-code space. We can just keep this event going with all the questions that will be coming through. I can see there's a lot of friends here in the audience. I can see Matt Hubbard saying, hi, Guy, and Mr. Hackathon, and Blank Page, Abdel. Philip is here, Pierre is here, Rachel. So yeah, lots of friends. We're surrounded by good people, and obviously, I love that Phil is saying. He was saying something about errors. Oh yeah, I need to know how that breaks things. Obviously, everyone at Switchboard is very interested to see all these new changes and all the breaking points. Dominic, hi Dominic. All right, awesome. Should I bring your screen into the space, and would you like to get started?
Sure. Let me make sure I'm resharing the right window.
Yeah. Let me know when it's good to go, and I'll just pull it in.
Okay. Yep, I think I'm ready. As ready as I'll ever be.
All right.
Let's log into. Okay, I was just in here messing around with some of this stuff, prepping for the course. So, so here's some of the more expanded views of the API documentation. I also have pulled up my accounts details, and then also how to get into the new API tokens and that page. But here's what we're going to be going over today. Not really in bulk because there's a lot to cover here, but these are the API docs for the new web API. I'm going to send you. Do you have this link, Claudia? I can send it to you.
Perfect. Yeah, so I can put it in the chat.
Where should I? Can I send? I can't. Do you know if I can send a message on this?
You should be able to, but don't worry about it. I'll find the link. It's all good.
Oh, there it is.
And then, do you have any? Can you make it bigger somehow? Awesome. Yeah, I got the link.
Bigger.
Yeah, maybe
I
like
can
full
try to
screen,
reshare.
or you can zoom in. I'm just gonna show the link here. Perfect. All right. Don't worry if not. I'll just pull your screen. I'll just make it full screen.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So these are the API docs. Something that. Oh shoot! Why is it? Okay, sharing this tab. Yeah. So these are the API docs. Something that when you're getting into this development, using their API, referencing it, what we're going to be covering in Make. I built all referencing these documents. I'm sure through your previous courses and all the intros to APIs and all that, people are hopefully somewhat familiar with API documentation. Airtable uses a REST API, so it's a RESTful API. So a lot of things are built in REST nowadays. It's a lot easier to understand, easier to read. Things like SOAP and GraphQL can be easy to read, but usually REST is more easier to read as it stands. So this is a RESTful API, and we're going to be going over authentication because that's the first step to getting into any of this. You have to authenticate first. Some predecessors, so we're going to be going over the authentication, and we're also going to be using these API calls in Make. So I'm sure folks are familiar with Make.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, Airtable and Make are some of the most loved tools in our community at No Code Ops. So I'm sure that this is going to be very valuable to our community.
Okay, awesome. Oh. Okay. All right. So I've got a scenario that I created to try out a lot of these endpoints. The thing to notate here, I'm not using the default Airtable modules. I'm not using the out-of-the-box Airtable modules. I'm using HTTP modules in Make because with the new personal access token, which you could use all three if you wanted to choose a better method than just API token. But with Airtable, how their app in Make is still built is it still uses the older, more deprecated API, uses the old API key. So you can't use the personal access token in the Make module itself, right? So you can choose Airtable, like the kind of standard thing right here, but we can't really use these right now because if you want to use a personal access token or OAuth, because it's still using the standard API key or API token. It's got this, like you can build a proxy if you wanted to. I've never done this myself, but we can't really use a personal access token here. I tried it the other day and I wasn't able to get it to work. So what I'm doing instead of using this Airtable module is I'm using the HTTP modules, which are the Make default way to call a REST web service really through anything. So this is what we use in our development toolbox. If we don't have an out-of-the-box application and like an out-of-the-box integration, we use these HTTP modules to run really any kind of call, be it a basic authentication call, like where you use a username password. It's generic to really any kind of RESTful API. It can use OAuth 2.0 API keys. Like you can use almost any authentication method, or just the basic one of making a request. In this example, I'm using an API key authentication request, which is this right here. So like
I can see that our audience is very eager. I can see there's questions popping up already, but I'm just gonna save them for after Rachel. But keep interacting in the chat. I love seeing that.
Yeah, Rachel, I haven't brought it up to them, but I know that they're looking at it. Airtable is one of the most heavily used low and no code databases out there. So the Make team should already be on that. But the question becomes, who built the Airtable application? Was it Airtable or was it Make? If it's Airtable, then it's on Airtable to get it updated. So it depends on who built the application. Right now, I have a couple of endpoints in this scenario that we use for a couple of things. You don't have to use these if you don't want to, but it can show you how to break down and getting various things inside the API. So like right now, if you went to here to like search for records in Airtable, it gives you a really nice interface for getting some of this data. Okay, I want to get a record or search records out of one of these bases, and it'll give you the tables, it'll give you the views, it gives you everything. But in the new way of authenticating, they don't give you the new authentication methods. So you have to break away from using these out-of-the-box methods for getting your data, right? You're getting away from no code and getting a little bit into code, but you have to break some of these things down to get to what you want. So if you want this base, first thing you're going to have to do is run an API call to list your bases, right? And hopefully everyone on this call is familiar with how Airtable is structured in their data architecture. If not, I can go over it. So in Airtable, we have tables, which are like your structured data structure with your fields and columns and rows. But on top of that, there's tables inside of a base. So base, and then you've got everything inside of that being data, like it says, data automations and interfaces. But the underlying architecture is base, and then tables, like a bunch of tables inside of the base. And then you've got your fields, they call these fields, and then records. So to get a record in this API call that we're about to make, we need to list our table and then our base to get the record, because you have to have those paths in your API call. But I digress. So we get in our bases, but to do that first, we have to authenticate, right? How do we authenticate? So we're going to get into the module, again, making an API key authentication request. And then what we need to do is create a new credential. So I'm going to go add. You can name it whatever you want. So guys, PAT, they're calling them PATs, personal access tokens. But you can name it whatever you want. So the key itself, and we're going to reference the docs in authentication. So right here, so we have basics. Airtable's API uses token-based authentication, types of tokens. And it addresses the types of tokens, PAT, and then OAuth tokens. I did try to build an OAuth integration with this, but it's a little cumbersome. I didn't want to cover it on this call because it'd be a lot to cover. We may even do another one about that specifically, but the preference is if you can make it work and have someone to help you do it, possibly, OAuth tokens are going to be best versus personal access tokens. But for now, personal access token is just fine.
And you know, if anyone wants to get any in-depth kind of or advanced knowledge or tips on Airtable, you know, feel free to join our community. It's free to join, and you can find so many experts in there, like Guy and other people. More than happy to help with anything. Sorry, Guy.
Absolutely. Thanks, Claudia. Okay, so it says, okay, types of tokens, and then how we're going to actually authenticate into it is we need to go into our account first. And I'm not showing anything private, so no worries there. But this is my account, and notice this is our standard token area, right? Like you can use this and copy it for your normal key. But now there's a section up here under API about creating your tokens. So it gives you these warnings and all these things. But when you do the create token, it takes you to the page where you can create the types of tokens. So right here we have personal access tokens or OAuth integrations. So my personal access tokens, I've got one right now. The beautiful part about these access tokens is if you wanted to create one and kind of limit what it does or what it can access, you can do that with these tokens. So in this token, I've got sample API key as the name it whatever you want, or bring in some kind of naming convention. And then you can add in the scopes that you want the key to be able to have. And by scopes, we mean what can this API key do inside of Airtable? This is all of the scopes right now that I have. I don't have an enterprise account. I assume there's more with an enterprise account, but these are the basic few with a non-enterprise account. So it's, reading of records, writing of records, reading of comments. So reading and writing are the two sides of that fence. So reading is like I can get data. Writing is I can do things with data. I can create, update, delete. I can run those kind of CRUD commands on the thing. That's writing. I can perform actions on that thing. So reading records would be like I can get records. Writing would be I can create records. Yeah, that's
don't worry
probably
about
me.
the chat.
We were trying to figure out. That's me. Yeah, that's definitely me. And I apologize for that. I didn't get a good setup before this one. I apologize.
What we decided at the end is that it kind of stops when we're talking, and it kind of fills in the space. So imagine it, think of it as a white noise. It just keeps you focused.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm trying to work on my work from home setup too, by the way. So that's probably part of it. So scopes, so you can write in your scopes and figure out what you want the API to do for this token. And then your access. So this, you can also build in access to certain bases. So right now this is saying all current and future bases in the workspace. So right now I think I've got one or two bases in this workspace. But if I wanted just this token to have access to one base, like, okay, this is my sales CRM base, so this is the token for that. Like you can kind of containerize the token to what you want it to be. So you can get really granular with some of its permissions and its access. I did this one just as a test and as a sample, but this says all current and future bases in the space. So if I add more, remove them, it kind of is dynamic to the bases in the space. So once you get that and you hit save, it's going to generate that token for you. Get that token. It's going to be kind of long. There's nothing in this space, so I don't mind showing it, but it's going to look pretty long. Let me open up another note here, and I can show you what it would look like. So this is what it's going to look like. It's going to be pretty long, but just know that that's what it's supposed to look like.
I think I can still see the same page.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, because I'm sharing just the window here. Hold on. Okay. Can you see this now? No.
Still the same, but yeah.
Hold on. Yeah,
Let me
I'll bring it
just,
into make.
yeah, yeah.
No, it's fine. So then I'm gonna bring in the key and I'll just expose it and show you. That's better. So here we have this really big long string of text. It's probably kind of small, but it's this right here. It starts with PAT, personal access token, and it's really big long string of text. But just know that that's what it's supposed to be. So then from here, going through authentication, what it's saying for you to do here is this is called curl or command URL, and it's saying, okay, bring in your URL here, but then where to put your token. Okay, it wants it in the header. So the /h means header, and it's saying authorization bearer your token. So what you would do is in here, you'd say in the header, the parameter name is going to be authorization. So I know to come back and change this. So in the header, authorization, bearer your token, exactly how they say it. Put it in the header. The parameter name is authorization. And then again, they say bearer your token. You're going to write in bearer and then put in your token. Great. Cool. So now we've got our authentication set up, and Make stores this for you so it doesn't expose it here. So again, making sure you're doing it the right way. So get everything copied and pasted the right way and everything before you paste it in there. And then if you're in Make and you want to change, remove it, or modify what you just did, say you put it in the wrong thing, you can go over here to keys. Same change. So we'll go over to keys, and then here's my two keys. So like here's my sample one that I created earlier, and here's my test one. So say you messed this one up accidentally and saved it, you can just delete it. So delete, and then boom, it's gone. But again, it masks it, it stores your actual token, so it doesn't expose it for your documentation or if you're creating looms or whatever you need to do with that scenario. But treat that sensitive. It can expose data. Okay, so once you get that done and you've authenticated using the PAT or personal access token, now we can start writing API call. So in these sample ones, I'm doing a couple of them down the line as far as the path. So like this first one, say you wanted to do, I want to get comments for a record. Well, the first thing you need to do is first to determine your base ID and your table ID for that record, right? Now, there's two ways to do this. You can do this through the API calls if you wanted to, or if you're already knowing where that record lives, say I want to get this record's comments right here. Well, you can do that through the URL because it gives you those IDs. So right here, airtable.com/, this is the base ID right here, app. This is the table ID. So app, whatever that text string is, / and then the URL, that's your table ID. It starts with TBL. So if you wanted to do it this way, you absolutely can. You can run the API call to get your bases. And again, it's going to output, and I'll go over this module in a minute, but it's going to output in more JSON format, but it gives you your bases, right? Same thing.
So can you tell us why we're doing this? Why are we pulling this API so far?
Yeah. So you're going to need these IDs when you're going to do things on records or manipulate data on tables and really do anything with these API calls. You're going to need these pieces of data in your API call. But remember, we're transitioning from in this time we're in with this where the Airtable app is not updated yet. If we wanted to do things like they give us in these modules right here, where we choose a base, we have to do that on our own now for the time being. Because again, they give you this drop down because they're doing the same API call that we're doing. They're listing the bases, right? So think of it like this drop down in this module is what we're doing right here.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to do that because it builds the path in the API call. So when we go to do list records, for instance, see, it gives us this URL, this get URL. We need the base ID and the table ID. So v0/base ID / table ID, or the name. I always use IDs and not names, but we need these two things in our path for it to do the list records. Before, when we were using the out-of-the-box make application, when we go to get records or search records, all we did was just drop down, yep, I want this base in this table, but now we can't use these modules yet because they're not updated in make. Okay, I want to, from this base, I want these tables of data, boom, go run it, and it's done. But that's truly no code. You're not having to build the URL, you're not having to build the API call path, but right now we have to for the time being because they're not allowing us to use PATs. Now, if you're not going to use a personal access token, then a lot of this doesn't matter. And what you could do instead, you can just run the arbitrary make an API call. So say I'm using the normal API key, right? And I wanted to do something in here like fields and comments and stuff. You can do this, but you'd still need to build the URL to do this. So you'd still need the base and the table and all that. It just does the connection for you, but you're really just doing, this is the same thing essentially. So using the HTTP module or this out-of-the-box Airtable module is really no different. It's still, you got to build this URL, you got to specify your method, you got to specify everything else, right? So it's the same thing. So you're having to do this to get the path built for your API call. So when you want to list records for these API docs, you have to get the base ID and the table ID. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just asking the audience, like, let us know if there's anything that you would like to know now along this presentation, or if there's anything specific that you would like to see. Yeah, just that.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we've covered authentication using these methods. So either personal access tokens or the older access token. Again, I haven't gone too far to build the OAuth tokens right here because it's a little complex. You have to build OAuth flows and you have to build all of that, which if you're familiar with it, feel free. But I've just used the personal access token for now. So again, once you get authentication built and you want to start using these endpoints, you would either need to run these calls in succession, like, okay, get your base, get your table, or run them independently and then build your call down wherever you need to build it. So list records. So like, for example, this one to list records, I know what table and what base I'm going to be operating in. And I've built that here through these set multiple variables module. So I've got base ID and table ID. I've already run these two calls to do that. All right, so now let me run that real quick and I'm going to list my records.
Do you handle data manipulation in Airtable or Make? Because Make also has the ability to manipulate data, right? That's a question by Mr. Hackathon.
Because Make also, when you mean manipulate data, do you mean like manipulating records? So like updating records and deleting records, things like that? Is that what you mean by manipulating data? I guess that manipulating data usually relates to like manipulating of records. But yeah, you can. So you can do update multiple, which is like a batch option. You can update a single record. You can create, delete. Yeah, all of these on the left. Everything aside from the get and list and then sync, these are all record manipulation endpoints. Updating, deleting, creating, that's all, CRUD type. Well, the R is more retrieving, so it's CUD, CUD. Date formatting, text formatting. Yeah, you can. I mean, make can do all of that. So if you have an input and you want to format data to go into an Airtable record, absolutely.
Maybe the question was like, why one? Yeah, where do you find it easier? Why would you prefer doing it in Airtable versus Make? I think that's more of what he meant.
It to me, I would I don't if I'm building the Airtable base, I don't want to have a whole lot of formulas. I don't want to have a whole lot built into the base because for me the base is storing the data. It's the relational database. Um, it's more of a data strategy in Airtable for me because I don't want to build a lot in there. If I ever have to move my data out of Airtable and I've got all these formulas, I've got all this stuff built in Airtable, and I want to move to something like Postgres and Supabase, Postgres doesn't give you formulas. You can do edge functions and do other stuff, but it doesn't give you out of the box formulas. So you'd have to rebuild all of that to be able to store your data in the right way. So for me, if I'm building on Airtable, it's going to be data. It's going to be dates, times, text, maybe attachments, but it's going to be hard data on the table, or it's going to be linked data to other tables, right? It's going to be relational. So for me, I wouldn't build the formulas here. I would build that formulaic logic in make. So I do the function in the make variable first, get the output, and then push that to Airtable. That's what I would do. That's my method.
Yeah, I think, at the end of the day, it's down to what you find easier for the process that you're
Absolutely.
using. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got other clients and other uses that we do formulas in Airtable, but in the future we're planning on moving it out of Airtable. So it just depends on your use of it at that point. Yep,
mhm.
you're welcome. Um, so again, these are some more basic endpoints. We've got listing of bases, listing of tables for a given base, listing of records, and then this other one is listing of comments too. So if you wanted to see comments on a record, so list comments. Again, you're going to need some of these path variables, so base ID, table ID, record ID. To do that, you can either run these commands here. So run these and then either set variables. To do all of this in a single flow, like if you wanted to list the comments, but you didn't want to like copy and paste from outputs and what have you, you could link all of these together, right? So you could take this one and bring it up here and kind of run it all in the same. So list your base, your table, and all that, and then end up down here. The only thing you're going to have to do is either bring in an iteration step or bring in some array function filtering, because what this is going to do is it outputs as an array. So if you're unfamiliar with arrays, like when you list your bases and you have more than one, it's going to give you multiple items in your array. So base 1 and base 2. There's ways that you can do this within Make to make it easy. But if you know, hey, I want to list comments for a record on this certain table in base, you would build in that formula here in your filter. So list your base, you would filter it. Okay, I want for this base, list your tables. Okay, filter for these tables, and then iterate for the next thing. Maybe get a record. And so on and so forth. So it's a bit of a step 1, 2, and 3 to get to this last endpoint. But that's really part of the whole overview is figuring out what you want to do. So if I want to list comments, okay, I want to list comments. You'll need to get these couple of pieces of data first. So be it the base ID, table ID, or record ID, and then fill out the rest of your endpoint, and then proceed. But there's also varying query parameters you can build in too. So akin to the same in Airtable module, so search records, we can build in various query parameters to some of these modules. So like how they give you here, so prod table, specify the table. Say you wanted to bring in a formula to list records, you can do that here. So list records, it's the same thing. I'm specifying here, I'm specifying two things. I'm specifying a view. Hey, I only want to look at this view. And I'm also specifying by a formula where status is equal to qualification. Let's back out here in my sample. So sales CRM. So I wanted to say, okay, give me records in this view that match this filter, this formulaic filter. So opportunities, status is equal to a certain thing. And again, you fill that out by putting in query parameters. So fill out your base URL right here, get method, view, and then you bring in your view ID, right? The view ID, not the name. And that's up here. So these are all built into the list records endpoint. So we've got filter by formula and then view. Those are the two that I'm including in my module. You don't have to include these, but if you wanted to filter by a formula, for instance, you can do that. I built this just to replicate this module here. So on our table, let me go to the different. So sales CRM, table opportunities. So if I wanted to say, okay, view, like this drop down, this all opportunities, and if I built in this formula, it's the same exact thing here. It's just in a more low code kind of way where you're having to specify the actual query parameter. But in this module, these are query parameters, formula. It's the same thing, limit, view, output. These are all things built into the module that they do for you in the no code way, that by using these query parameters, but using this API documentation, you would build into your call. View, sort, max records, that's the limit. Like they tell you at the bottom how many you want to pull back. All these kind of things are all query parameters that you build into your API call if that's how you want to build it.
Guy, to be more visually, also more practical, when is it that you realized that when is it the first time that you used APIs in Airtable or Make, and why was it helpful for you? How did it change your process? Like, why would somebody think of using APIs in Airtable and Make?
Using, so like doing what we're doing right here,
yeah,
or just APIs in general?
Just like I have this problem, and for example, I've been using Airtable myself, and I never thought of using Airtable's APIs. Why would I go there? What kind of problems am I trying to fix?
Well, for me, it's expanding on what's currently built. So if I wanted to expand on these modules, right? Like right now, we have endpoints in their API that I can't use with these out of the box modules. These are all manipulating records, but now we have things like I want to list comments and I want to create a table, or I want to create a base. I can't do that with these out of the box modules. So if you have part of your process, one of my other demos I was going to touch on but not really get too deep into was like creating a table automatically. Hey, I have a process that in a base for every new client, I create table, a table with these 10 fields, right? If that's your process. But with our new API endpoints, I can do that automatically. It's pretty awesome. You just have to build your call, specify a couple of things in that API call, like the table name or whatever, and then you can now bring that into your workflow automatically. So if your workflow, like I was saying in that example, is create a table, you can do that. Or if you're an ops director or someone who wants to see comments of a record, you can do that now because you can list comments. Say for some reason automatically you want to create a comment on a record, and you can't do that through Softr or Tooljet or some of the other front ends out there. Is, hey, I'm just going to hook into a make scenario and do that automatically. All you have to specify is these couple of parameters and the record ID, and you're done. So it just expands
easy peasy.
on the development. Yeah, so easy, right? It just expands on the development capability of either the developer building the solution or the operations director or whoever's wanting this done, building more on top of the Airtable out of the box thing in Make. You can do these things in Zapier too. I prefer Make. It's where I'm comfortable in, but you can do this anywhere. You can do it in Retool. You can do it really anywhere that can make REST API calls. Really, Zapier can do it. All of them can do it. I was just demoing Make, for instance. N8N can do it. I mean, they all can do it. So, yeah, it's just wherever you're developmentally more comfortable or where you want to perform these actions. It just gives you that ability to expand on your workflow, automating more things. But the other beautiful part about the new API is they also include out-of-the-box webhooks without having to run scripts like we're doing right now with Airtable automations. Hey, something happens, post a hook to this endpoint. We're doing that with running of scripts with Airtable automations. But now they're giving you that option out of the box with this webhooks object and these webhook endpoints.
Awesome. People are saying, Dominic is saying, this is a great workshop. So thank you so much, Dominic. I mean, smash that like button if you want,
Yeah,
and
really
give us a follow
it.
so you don't miss out on any of our, good API tips.
Documenting workflows in Make, there's a lot of ways to do it. And he asked a question. I wanted to touch on it real quick, but and we'll get back into Airtable and API stuff. But there's a lot of ways to do it, Dominic. There's the most common that I find that people want are usually Loom videos. I've also been able to have some clients that we actually put like Almanac or Notion documents into the scenario. So like right here, like he was saying, adding of notes. So if you wanted to add a note to say the initial trigger module and say, okay, I created this Notion document. So link to Notion document or whatever. And then whoever's in that scenario can go, look at that. There's a ton of ways to do this. There's a lot of things you can expand on with Make's API, because Make has an API. Something I was exploring myself for a little while was how can I get a scenario's JSON and interpret that either through like ChatGPT or some kind of conversion or like a translation. Like, hey, okay, I've got these modules. What does it do? Okay, it triggers by listing bases, and then it does, here's the workflow given my documentation in this scenario. So there's ways you could do that if you were smart enough or had the time to do that, because Make has an API that I could get the scenario output from this scenario. It gives it to you in JSON format. So there's a lot of things you can do with documenting of processes and automations, all the way down to listing every single scenario, all the screenshotting. I mean, there's a ton of ways. There's no right or wrong way. It all depends on user and or client preference. Typically for me, it's like a Loom and a brief overview of what the process is. And also I'm also heavy on naming your modules. So name the modules, and also a decent naming convention for your scenario names. Like, what does it do? What's the trigger event? What's the scenario do in summary? And that's about it. So there's, again, no right or wrong way. If you ask me later in the community, then I can give you some of my ways. But yeah, there's a lot of ways to document and Make. So back to this API overview. I know we have not much time, Claudia, but
I know you go.
Again,
I mean, about 5 minutes, and then we can do a little bit of Q&A. And everyone here in the audience, feel free to start dropping your questions in the chat, and we'll try to answer them at the end.
Yeah, and one thing to notate that I will make mention of too on these documents, everything under this area here, like the base data, except for views, manipulating of views, it does say enterprise. So unless you're on an enterprise plan, some of these things are going to be plan gated, as it were. So like org management, permissions. So just keep in mind of that. If you're trying to use some of these endpoints, it's going to be gated with some of your plan features. So, but everything else, webhooks and above should be just fine to use on, I believe, any plan, given API access. And then you've got things like rate limits to go over. So API is limited to 5 requests per second per base. Not something you'll need to think about all the time, but something to keep in your mind as a developer. Okay, it's got a 5 requests per second. So if you're doing a lot of operations quickly, you'll need to build that into your workflow and hopefully anticipate for it if you're able to at the time. If not, like in using Make, there's ways to error handle. So like if I'm making a lot of these calls to list comments or create records, I can add error handlers, which if you want to, you can do things like a sleep module to wait for a couple seconds and then redo what you were doing and then have it continue. So in Make, there's a lot of ways to account for these kinds of rate limits. It happens a lot when I'm building with ClickUp, especially because ClickUp has a somewhat limited API rate limit as well. But then there's, if you get further into the weeds, you can do either a higher plan on Airtable. You can talk to them and maybe get a higher plan or a higher rate limit as well. Errors. So this section goes over some of the error codes that they might throw if there are errors. So if you get one, try to come in here and find the code. Like, oh, it's a 413. Oh, it's too large. So things like attachments and stuff like that. What's a 400? Oh, something's wrong with my API call. Otherwise, I mean, these docs are pretty good. They're pretty in depth, and they should answer most questions that you might have. I'm going to open up Q&A, of course, but yeah, you can run repeaters. There's some things you might be able to do to like cache or queue some stuff like that too. But I'm going to open up to Q&A. I'm in the community. I'm the same name in there too. So hit me with your questions there too if you have any. I'm happy to answer and talk Make and Airtable all day.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Guy, for the presentation and just your valuable insights. I know that, if I had to pick one person to talk about Airtable or Make, you're the first guy that pops into my head. You must be so tired of these jokes all the time.
No, not at all.
But anyway, this was great. So I have a couple questions that I've saved up in the in the registration form. But also I just wanted to remind everyone here that we're 1 month away from starting our API bootcamp and no code ops. So if you also want to become an API expert, like Guy here and many others in our community, feel free to drop me a DM either on Discord, LinkedIn, wherever you want. I will also share a link here in the chat, and join our cohort because we have lots of great instructors. And in 3 weeks, you can just become an API expert, and we've all seen how valuable that is, especially if you're a no coder. You just need that missing link between being a no coder and getting a bit more advanced, just like what we showed you today. So let's get to questions.
Here at 9X as well. They're a great group. They're doing some really great things. So highly recommend.
Oh, thank you, Guy. All right, let me look at these questions here that we have. Something that you haven't answered yet. Is there anything that you wish you could do with the API that you can't at the moment? That's a good question.
With the API, with the Airtable API specifically,
we could say that.
If I could, it'd be great to run Airtable automations, probably like be able to, and you could do that. I know with webhooks, but if they had an endpoint for automations to where you could run periodically run an Airtable automations or run an Airtable automation, that would be a good endpoint to have to where you could trigger an automation by an event or something through Maker's API or what have you. Otherwise, I feel like a lot of their endpoints are getting better with their use cases. So API management was what he was saying a second ago. Yeah, there would be. I think API management would be good, but it'd be very touchy of a subject, especially with security and controls or governance, because if you can give someone the ability to manipulate APIs or API tokens and keys, then that could be a problem for security teams or for control and governance teams. Great thought, I would think, of course, but looking at bigger picture, some like a larger organization would probably bulk at that and not want that at all. So let's see what else. Building apps where
Would
users
you manage that in Make or Airtable?
manage. Would I manage? What would I manage? Sorry, I missed that question. What would I manage in Make or Airtable?
When
Form.
building applications where users are making API requests and you have to add rate limits, credits, etc., would you do that in Make or Airtable?
Oh, when making API calls in Make or Airtable? Well, I don't know if in Airtable you can make a whole lot of calls unless you're using JavaScript and running scripts. I don't know what other API calls you could use aside from the integrated apps like SendGrid and Gmail and stuff like that. But I don't know of ways to error handle in the Airtable automations outright, but in Make it's way better to do that in Make because you can add in sleeps, you can add in error handling that have a whole bunch of directives. You can add in other scenarios to help with like queues. So like if you're doing a lot of webhook stuff, you could have a scenario that acts like a I don't know, like a fire hose where it kind of lets only a certain amount through. Like it waits and sends and waits and sends. There's a lot of things you can do in Make and Zapier and these actual automation platforms that would probably be what you're looking for. So like rate limits, and when he says credits, I'm not sure what credits would be, but yeah, especially with rate limiting and error handling, you would build. I would want that built in a platform meant to handle those kind of things. Again, for me, Airtable is the data. Yeah, usually the database.
We have a question from Pierre. Do you think we'll be able to create formula fields and reference fields through APIs at one point?
Creating of fields. Yeah. So there are, you can create fields. You just have to look at the field types that they give you the ability to make. I was actually pulling this up earlier when I was creating the table. Do you mind if I reshare?
No, sure.
I'm going to show that real quick. Create field. I think this is the right screen. So in their documents, it gives you varying field types. Like when you want to create fields, there are a ton of field types. There's a better version of this. One second. Creating of tables. When we want to create tables, it gives you the field configs. That's what I was looking for. It's like, here's your list of field types. So if it's in one of these field types, yeah, you're able to create it with the API. So when you're talking about formula fields, it's right here. So formula, it's going to bring me down the page. So formula. So in your API call, when you're doing this, it's going to be a field type. So the type is going to be formula. And then you put in, looks like options. So is valid, reference array of strings. So compute a value in each record based on other fields. I haven't messed with this myself, but it looks like you
can. He says it might be just a read-only property, but maybe we can play around with it and we can get back to you, Pierre. We have a question
this is where you go to get that question answered.
Yeah, by Sabir. Have you ever used Google Sheets API? And if so, is it as good as Airtable API?
Good question. As a data person or as a data guy with that background, Sheets is not a database, and Sheets is not meant to be a database. Sheets is a place to get ideas down and do ad hoc analysis, but always go Airtable or some kind of database architecture or some kind of non-spreadsheet based place for your data, period. End of sentence. I mean, that's like if you're starting to build a database or build tables and build the data architecture, start with something like Airtable, like no code DB, like base, like there's a ton of them. You get ideas down for how you want Airtable to be structured and what you might want in there, but Sheets and Excel, like those are not databases. Now, I've seen a lot of clients and a lot of customers use it that way, and that's fine. But there should be a strategy in place to get away from those things and get out of Sheets and out of Excel for your data and get into an actual database. Because and going back to the API topic about Sheets, it's okay, but it's a little slow. It's limited. It doesn't compress data, so it might take a little longer to return data. It's not as fast as Airtable. It's not as fast as some of these other ones. So it's okay to start, but definitely plan to get out of it as your data gets a little bigger.
Awesome. Let's see. We got one more question by David Payne from our community. So, which one is the most effective way to bidirectionally synchronize Airtable with other no-code tools?
There's a couple options. Am I still? I don't think I'm still sharing my screen. A great one that comes to mind that I think I don't know if you guys you guys did a session with this yesterday, right, or like the day before. It's Whale Sync.
Yeah.
Whale Sync is a great one. Yep. So Whale Sync's a great one. There's a couple of other ones.
Whale Sync.
Yeah, Whale Sync's great. Coupler is another one. There's quite a few that are out there. So this is the one that I would probably turn to start if I'm doing syncing between applications, is likely Whale Sync to start. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So let me see if I can just squeeze in one more question, and then I'm gonna set you free.
Airtable, Postgres.
Oh, that's a big one. All right. How to use Airtable for a live auction site with Auth, an online payment platform like Square. I have no idea what Square is. Squarespace?
Square is a payment processing platform.
Oh, there you go. Oh,
You're
hi,
right,
Kenny.
Peter.
It
does.
About to
it can go. Yeah, I mean, the thing though, Pierre, is like two-way syncing. You need to figure out first what your source of truth is. Is it Airtable? Then you'd sync to Airtable or from it or from. So you do have to develop that source of truth first. Sorry, Claude, I didn't mean to cut you off. There's a question about two-way syncing. Well, I mean, you got to figure out your source of truth first, and then you should sync into that and out of it. But if you don't have that right now, or your strategy is not mature enough to do that, then you may need to go from Airtable to Webflow or what have you. And Whale Sync is good for that, but again, you're already talking about a source of truth anyway. Airtable, Postgres, Supabase, those can all be sources of truth for your data strategy. And if you need to sync Airtable to Webflow, you're going from your source of truth to Webflow, or the opposite to update records, or if you're storing like CMS data in Webflow or something. So, yeah. But to your question, Claudia, about live data, I don't know if Airtable can do live streaming of data, like real-time streaming, like Supabase can do in some of its JS and some of its code-based libraries. But it's decently fast reads. I don't know about live data or live updates, but you need probably something in Bubble or something in the front end to do those listening, or maybe use a WebSocket to do like the constant updates to listen for events. But hard to answer that question on this kind of a live stream for sure.
Yeah,
I need a lot more details to answer that for sure.
100%. And there's so many more questions, but unfortunately, my friends, we have to wrap up. And so if you do, want to get an answer, we'll try our best to get back to you. But also, I highly recommend joining our community at NoCodeOps, because we're always there. Myself, kind of aiming to be 24/7, but I'm not as powerful as AI, but just getting there. So yeah, feel free to join our community, and we'll try to answer all the further questions you might have. And for next week, we'll have Ample Cloud CEO Jason Green coming to have a final episode on APIs. This has been an incredible series of events based on this very important topic, and so we're wrapping up with the future of APIs next week, next Thursday, and then maybe after that, the week after, we could have a roundtable with all our speakers here from the API world, and we can just chat and answer all your questions. So make sure you don't miss that out. Subscribe to our channel so you get a notification as well. And yeah, I thank you so much, Guy, once again for
Absolutely.
spending your time here with us again and sharing your knowledge. Absolutely appreciate it, and it's ever so valuable to have you here as a guest. And to everyone else in the audience, I wish you all well, and I hope you all have an amazing weekend.
Thanks, Claudia. Have a good rest of your day. Appreciate it.
Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.